Hello everyone, my name is Liza. Today we are going to talk about a brief introduction into music history and history of the guitar. Music has always been a part of human history ever since the prehistoric time, but it was not properly documented then. As we know, in India we have three major dominant schools of music: the Hindustani, Carnatic, and the Western school of music. Today we are going to discuss about Western music in the scope of this class. So, when did music begin? And what is music? Its evolution has been noted since the ancient time of the Greeks and Romans throughout all six eras of artistic history. The Greeks has many instruments including the lyre, the harp, and the cornu horn. The Greek also developed some kind of musical notation, specifically Dorian and Lydian, which are modes, of course. These were names based on the tribes and region of that area at that time. The names were based on the unique notes and their specific ordering of musical tones and their corresponding notes. All of these has helped music to develop, and it would have been in a different direction had it not been for two major factors. One being the rise of Christianity, and two, the fall of Rome. The medieval period. This was from 500 AD to 1450, 14th century. During this time, famine, internal conflict has caused the ancient world to crumble, leading its way to the Middle Ages. All of the technological advance completely vanished when Rome fell. Life is difficult and people struggle to live. Therefore, few had the desire and time to make music. However, one bright spot we can see during this period was the stability given by the church. Church leaders quickly recognized the power of music and started using as a form of meditation and prayers. Religious song at this time was called the plain chant, which is some sort of a melody sung in Latin, which is the language of the church at that time. Also during this time, the church prohibited the use of any musical instrument because musical instruments were associated with the pagan culture. So what is a pagan culture, you may ask? Pagan culture is the ethnic, authentic religion of the Greeks and Romans, where people worship multiple gods and goddesses. Rituals and sacrifice were integral parts of the pagan culture. So church leaders prohibit the use of any musical instrument. Therefore, all plain chant were unaccompanied vocals only, which is known as a cappella, meaning in the style of the chapel. The most famous type of plain chant developed during this era was the Gregorian chant, developed by Pope Gregory the Great and sung by the Gregorian monks. The Gregorian monks also created the first kind of a standard notation called the neumes. These are symbols and shapes meant to represent specific pitches of music. These monks are the forebearer of today's standard musical notation that helps us musicians to communicate and exchange ideas. Unlike at that time, people learn music just by oral, meaning if I have to study music with a teacher, I have to remember everything by hook or by crook because there is no way that I can write it down, or there is no some form of written down music at that time. So the Gregorian monk also developed the church modes, which are known as Dorian, Phrygian, Hypodorian, Hyperphrygian, Mixolydian, Hypermixolydian, and many more. But in today's music, today's modern day music, we use only 7 modes, which we all know and love, and these are the Ionian mode, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, also known as the natural minor scale, and the Locrian mode. There are many songs that uses these modes. For example, I know the Beatles song called The Norwegian Wood uses the Mixolydian mode, and also there is a song by Daft Punk called Get Lucky, or Uptown Funk by Bruno Mars, which uses the Dorian mode. You can also find out many songs by looking into YouTube or maybe listen it by ear to determine which church modes that we are borrowing from or using from. Also to mention, the Gregorian chants were monophony in nature, meaning a single melody is performed unaccompanied. That is, no harmony played with the melody, which is a single melody played alone, and in this case, it's the vocal. Some criticism arose during this era where the vocals were clouded by polyphony. So what is polyphony? Polyphony is when 2 melody played together to create a unified sound. Therefore, with the late medieval era, we saw a rise in complex music due to polyphony. Therefore, in a clear definition between popular music of today and the Western classical music is the time period. We have the prehistoric era where there were no proper documentation, the medieval era, which was credited to the Gregorian monk who popularized the Gregorian chant, and also they have created the first ancient standard notation for music known as the neumes, which are shapes to represent specific pitches in music. And then we have, during the late medieval era, we have the rise in polyphony, complex music. The Renaissance period. The Renaissance period was from the 1400 to 1600 century. There was the early Renaissance and late Renaissance period. The Renaissance period includes all forms of arts and culture, not just music. Renaissance period is a key feature of many periods. Music was liberated from the ancient medieval period, and it quickly became a tool for expression. It was no longer expected to follow the sets of determined rules, which predominantly is sacred to the church. During this period, the printing press was also developed, and development of printing press meaning music can be distributed on a large scale and allow the distribution of music across continent. As a result, music started to develop as a form of entertainment where even amateur could take part in. This period was also a time of great political and social reform. Events such as the Protestant Reformation has a huge impact. There was also a huge increase in humanistic thought, which challenged the supremacy of the church. In terms of music, more and more techniques and new styles were developed, where also there was a rebirth of interest of the ancient worlds where composers draw inspiration from ancient Greece and Rome. Music during the Renaissance period were based on modes, which are the key center of modern tonality. There was the texture of four or more parts, including blending parts in musical context. There was music focusing on chordal progression blending with harmony, and both instruments and vocals were very popular during this era. The early Renaissance composers were Guillaume Dufay, who wrote music for church based on the Gregorian chant. Thomas Tallis composed music during the reigns of four monarchs: Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I, Queens of England. The late Renaissance composers were Palestrina, Birth, Allegri, and many more. I highly recommend you check them out on YouTube or the internet. And if you have any question or difficulties, let me know in the comments and I will link all the pieces down below. The Baroque period. The Baroque period is from the 16th century, which is from 1600 to 1750. The Baroque period is a time where the tonality we are most familiar with today, major and minor, became established. Major and minor keys took center stage and have held on to this position ever since. The modes, which was of characteristic of the Renaissance period, gave way to this new modern tonality. The tonality of the major and minor keys was backed up by an increasingly complex harmony used by composers in structures such as the fugues and toccatas. Baroque composers like to use a lot of different melody lines played simultaneously to form a coherent whole. Baroque music is also characterized by an increasing emphasis on contrast. This is heard in a number of ways, such as loud and quite dynamic, example volume, solo and ensemble, example concerto, different instrumental timbre or sound. During this time, also, it was a great time for scientific discoveries. Individuals such as Galileo and Isaac Newton were of this period. Great artists such as Rembrandt and Caravaggio were developing new techniques in the worlds of art. So, during the Baroque period, musical features were lots of ornamentation and embellishment in music. Counterpoint became extremely popular, and the harpsichord was widely used. Also, an introduction of dramatic music as an art form, also known as the opera. Baroque period composers were Bach, which was very well known during this period. Vivaldi was very famous for the Four Seasons and for his Gloria, Handel, and many more. The Classical period. The Classical period was from 1730 to 1820. Vienna, Austria was the center of this movement. Introduction of the piano replacing the harpsichord and clarinet were very common during this era. Musicians during this period started to emulate the style of classical period of the ancient Greece and Romans, and this led to a focus on simplicity and clear division between parts. It is also make use of the style which emphasized light elegance instead of the Baroque strict, dignified seriousness and impressive grandeur. Variety and contrast within the piece became more pronounced than before, and the orchestra grew in size, power, and range. The classical period musical features were shorter melodies with clear-cut phrases, importance of instrumental music because the size of the orchestra grew, greater variety of key dynamics and rhythms used, development of large-scale structures such as sonata form. In the classical period also witnessed the rise of symphony. which is a large-scale orchestral composition usually made up of to four movements, and it was and still seen as being the medium by which composers express their most profound musical thoughts. For example, the Beethoven Fifth Symphony. Classical period composers were of Beethoven, Mozart, and many more. The Romantic period was from 1830 to 1900. This period does not necessarily mean romantic love, though it is one of them, but it mainly focuses on strong emotions. For example, nationalist pride is very important during this period. We saw a massive expansion in the size of the orchestra and complex composition being composed. Composers started to move away from the set rules and strict routines. Instead, new cycles and structures were formed, such as the song cycle, nocturnes, and also rhapsody. Some composers in this romantic period uses the music to try to describe a particular item, place, or an idea. Composers started to rebel against the formal structure of the classical period. The Romantic period musical features were big expansion in size of the orchestra and in types of instruments. A larger range and pitch could be very easily expressed on the piano, bigger range of dynamics, nationalism in music. For example, some composers sought to use their composition to celebrate their countries. Example, Sibelius Finlandia. This is a piece, you can check it out in YouTube. Also, increasingly elaborate harmonic progressions. The Romantic period composers were of Chopin, Wagner, and many more. Composers started to experiment more, and this led the way into the contemporary era. Contemporary period. Contemporary period was from the 1900 up to the present day. The 20th century is quite ambiguous because many style and many types of music falls under the 20th century. The key feature of the contemporary period is atonality, without following any key or a tonal center, breaking away from old styles of composition and also experimentation, which is music in the moment. In regard to classical music, famous composer of the contemporary period is Schoenberg, Britten, and many more. We saw the birth of blues in the United States in the 1860s by African American, from roots in African American folk songs and spiritual songs. Blues is also known as a genre for sad, belonging, melancholy feel. Blues incorporated spirituals, folk songs, feel holler, shout, chants, and ballads. It is usually characterized by the call and response pattern, the blues scales and specific chord progression, of which the 12th bar blues is the most common. Blues notes are worried notes, and the third, fifth, or seventh is flattened in pitch, which are essential part of the sound. As we're all quite familiar with the blues, we can say that there are many artists and composers who spread the blues around the world like wildfire. Notable blues artists are B.B. King, Buddy Guy, Muddy Waters, Ma Rainey, Eric Clapton, and many more. Jazz. We saw the birth of jazz music in the United States in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, with its root in blues and ragtimes. Jazz is a music genre that originated in the African American communities of Louisiana, United States. It has been recognized as a major form of musical expression in traditional and popular music, linked by the common bonds of African American and European American Western classical music. Jazz has roots in European harmony and African rhythmic rituals. The distinctive elements of jazz include characteristic rhythm patterns, harmonic practices related to but not identical with functional harmony, and the practice of improvisation. Jazz has been influenced by traditional classical music and popular music. Notable artists are Louis Armstrong, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Ella Fitzgerald, and many more. History of the guitar. There are many ancient instruments that influence the modern day guitar. There are stone carving, sculptures, stone painting, tomb painting in Central Asia, Egypt, and Mesopotamia, where string instruments were used. The word guitar most probably comes from the Greek word githara. But again, this linguistic origin of the guitar can also be traced back to Sanskrit. In Sanskrit and Persian, it has been revealed that there are several types of instruments connected with the word tar, meaning string. The shape of the guitar goes back to two instruments, the oud and the lute. The oud was invented by the sixth grandson of Adam. Who is Adam? Well, the Adam who ate the fruit from the Bible story. Yeah, that's quite ancient. So his grandson name is Lamech, who was Noah's grandfather. During the medieval period, the oud was most likely introduced to Western Europe by the Moors. The instrument passed from the Egyptian to the Greeks and then on to the Roman, who took it to Europe. So, how do you identify between the oud and the lute? Unlike the oud, which is fretless, the European lute actually has frets. The European version of the oud came to be known as the lute. The word luthier, meaning string instrument maker, is also derived from the French lute. Guitar during the Renaissance. The lute had evolved significantly by the end of the Renaissance period. Many Renaissance lutes had up to 20 to 30 strings. But the lute-like shape of the instrument was fading in popularity. This five-course chitarra battente, on the right, first appeared in Italy at around the same time. By the 15th and 16th centuries, that is the late Renaissance, and starting of the Baroque period, musicians in Spain began to favor instruments featuring the familiar curved shape we now associated with guitar. Baroque guitars. But these guitars, known as Baroque guitars, effectively replaced the lute as the go-to string instruments for musicians from about 1600 to 1750. Then in Spain, Portugal, and Italy during that time, the viola, which has curving side that gives its body an hourglass shape, became popular. Mariachi group still use a version of the viola until today. The evolution of Spanish guitar settled by the 1790s. By the 1790s, they had the standard body type and six courses of strings that resembles the modern guitar but were smaller. Spanish musician and guitar maker Antonio de Torres Jurado changed all that in the mid 1800s when he created the style of guitar that gave rise to all guitars to follow. His design radically improved the volume, tone, and projection of the instrument and very soon became the accepted construction standard. It has remained unchanged and unchallenged to this day. Influential Spanish guitarist maestro Andres Segovia established Torres classical guitar as a concert instrument. The talented guitarist also wrote complex musical composition that we now identify as classical guitar music. From here we have the steel string, durable string guitar, which is very versatile for all types of songs and genre. Let me know in the comments below if you would like to talk more about steel string guitar and electric guitars. Thank you so much.